Hello, my name is Samantha Filio, and I did my Rogerian argument paper on the mental health effects of horror films, finding a shared understanding. And I chose this topic because I feel very passionately about it, and I really do love horror films and what they can bring to people's lives. Movies have been part of the human experience since the 1800s. There have been numerous types and genres that have evolved over the years, from the older werewolf and Frankenstein movies to the more well-known Night of the Living Dead and Texas Chainsaw Massacre type of slasher movies. Feature films have only grown in popularity since the 1980s, with many remakes being made. These movies, according to psychology author Dr. G. Neil Martin, are movies that are filled with blood and gore, have extended chase scenes, and have groups of people being hunted down in inventive ways. Conversation is relevant because the COVID-19 pandemic brought mental health to the foreground of medicine, and it is discussed and researched more vigorously than it has been in previous years. People were also quarantined in their homes, which gave them way more viewing time than they have had in the past. In general, people have very hard-lined opinions when it comes to the horror movie genre. They either do or do not like the movies, which is why I feel that understanding why and how we are affected by horror movies may open up pathways to finding alternative uses that help others gain the resiliency skills that come from watching this genre. I think that watching horror movies can increase anxiety and stress and have detrimental mental health effects. According to Colorado professor of psychology Frederick Coolidge, people who are less emotionally stable may notice amplified anxiety and stress when watching horror movies. Many people who do not like horror movies believe that they cause nightmares or night terrors. In a 2017 study in Munich, Germany, it was determined that nightmares were associated with sleep duration, and that can be affected by stressful events like watching horror movies. Many people opposed to horror movies believe that they can cause desensitization to fear and violence. According to award-winning professor of psychology Barbara Cray, people who habitually watch violence in media may have a faster accessibility to aggressive cognitions. It's essential to acknowledge the valid concerns expressed by those who hold skepticism about the potential positive effects of horror movies on mental health. Critics rightly point out worries surrounding anxiety, sleep disturbances, and the potential desensitization to violence and fear that might arise from exposure to these movies. There are many positives to watching horror movies, one of those being catharsis, which is an emotional release of repressed feelings, according to Sigmund Freud. This can be induced in a theater because you are in a nice, safe, controlled space to watch and view your horror movies. To a 2021 study, people who were exposed to horror media and horror movies were actually more mentally resilient during the pandemic. This is because they were engaged in multiple fictional horror scenarios that now simulated the real-world experiences. The positive benefit of watching horror movies is the ability for people to explore the darker sides of human nature. Horror author Stephen King wrote that the mythic horror movie is like a sick joke. It has a dirty job to do, and it deliberately appeals to the worst in all of us. Opponents and critics of horror movies share a common goal: the promotion of mental well-being. Those who do want you to watch horror movies want you to be mentally resilient and understand real-world scenarios, while those who do not want you to watch them want you to not experience stress, fear, or anxiety. Naysayers and supporters of horror movies can agree that they want people to experience positive emotions or feel good when they leave a film. The term good is relative, and each person sees the world through a different lens depending on their life experiences. To Professors Yang and Zhang of Johns Hopkins University, people feel confident in their ability to navigate demanding situations after watching horror movies. This is because they feel like they have accomplished a feat or faced a fear. Sides of this argument bring up valid points about the mental health effects of horror movies. While some argue that these films may negatively impact psychological well-being, proponents of horror movies emphasize their potential therapeutic benefits in terms of catharsis, fear confrontation, and empowerment. Both sides must be willing to explore the research behind why people enjoy horror movies and the positive emotions and experiences that they feel, while understanding that people may experience stress emotions while watching these movies. Seeking out current research will further that understanding. I agree that moderation and responsible consumption of anything that elicits a fear response is a wise choice. Paying attention to the psychological and physiological effects that horror movies have helps people understand why a person may or may not want to watch one. Surrounding the impact of horror movies on mental health is multifaceted and complex. By adopting a Rogerian approach, I hope I was able to acknowledge both perspectives and highlight the importance of moderation and responsible consumption in enjoying horror movies for mental health purposes. Thank you. Why and how we are affected by horror movies may open up pathways for finding alternative uses that help others gain the resiliency skills that come from watching this genre. In this slide, you'll see my references, many of which include studies that support the mental health effects of horror movies.